People say I had two great accidents in my life, a streetcar and Diego Rivera. They get it wrong. The streetcar shattered my spine, my collarbone, my pelvis. Diego shattered something no surgeon could ever set back. And I let him. Twice. I married Diego, divorced him, and married him again, knowing exactly what he was. A genius. A liar. A fire I couldn't stop walking into. This is not a story about my paintings. This is about the man I loved so much it nearly killed me. It starts with a 15-year-old girl who made a promise she should never have kept. I grew up in a blue house that always smelled like wet earth and turpentine. My father, Guillermo, spent his days behind a heavy wooden camera, stacking glass plates in the darkroom while his hands shook from the fits he never spoke about. He called me his little sparrow, though my legs were crooked from polio, and I hated how thin they looked in his photographs. Sometimes I would stand in the garden, pretending the bougainvillea could hide me from the world. But the camera always found me. My mother said it was a blessing to have memories pressed into silver and glass. I thought it was a curse. Every photograph, a body I could not escape. At the table, my sisters whispered about boys and saints. I watched my father's face instead, the way his eyes went far away when he felt a seizure coming. I learned to be quiet, to move softly, to carry the weight of other people's pain without complaint. That is what girls were for, was it not? To hold the house together, to swallow the noise. I told myself I would be different. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to fix bodies, not just hide them. When I was 15, they let me into the National Preparatory School, a place for men mostly, but I forced my way in. I wore my hair in braids, carried a notebook with the edges bitten from nerves, and tried to walk like I belonged. The boys called me La Rara, the strange one. I did not care. I was hungry for something I could not name. One afternoon, the halls smelled of lime dust and paint. I followed the noise to the aula magna, and there he was, Diego Rivera, enormous on the scaffold, his shirt stained every color, a cigarette burning down to the filter. He did not see me. He was too busy commanding the wall, dragging whole worlds out of buckets and brushes. I stood beneath him, my neck aching, and watched the colors drip and bloom. I remember thinking, this is what it means to be alive, to make something bigger than yourself, to leave a mark that cannot be erased. I wanted to be part of that world. I wanted him to see me, not as a child, not as a shadow, but as someone who could matter. In my diary, I wrote, "When I saw Rivera paint, I felt the brush beating like a heart." I meant it. I watched him for days, hiding behind columns, memorizing the shape of his hands, the way his voice echoed when he laughed with the workers. I started to believe that if I could just get close enough, some of that electricity would jump to me. I made a promise in that hallway, pressed right up against the cold stone, a vow I would spend the rest of my life regretting. One day, I will marry Diego Rivera. I was just a girl with crooked legs and too many questions. I did not know that longing is a kind of injury, one that never shows up on an X-ray. I did not know what it would cost to keep that promise. But I made it anyway, and everything that came after started there, in the shadow of a mural, with paint flecks in my hair and a secret burning in my chest. On September 17th, 1925, the world split open. I was 18 and in love with a boy who made me laugh, who made me feel like maybe I could outrun the bad luck that always trailed behind me. The bus was crowded, the air thick with sweat and cheap perfume, and then, metal against metal, a scream that wasn't mine. glass in my mouth. I remember the pain before I remember the silence. I remember the handrail, cold, merciless, driving itself through my pelvis, shattering bone and pride and any hope I had ever had of being ordinary. People talk about fate like it is a gentle thing. They do not know what it is like to wake up and find your body rearranged by violence. The doctors at Hospital de la Cruz counted the breaks: spine, right leg, foot, collarbone, ribs. My mother fainted when she saw me wrapped in plaster, a mummy with a beating heart. Alejandro wrote me letters I could not answer. I stared at the ceiling for days, weeks, measuring time by the sound of nurses' shoes. I used to believe I would be a doctor, that I could fix what was broken. But I was the one who needed fixing now, and nobody, not even the saints, could put me back together. I lay in that bed, trapped inside a body that belonged more to pain than to me. My father brought his camera, took pictures of me in casts and shadows. He was trying to save what he could, but the film only captured the shell. My mother hung a mirror above my bed so I could see myself. I hated it at first. It felt like punishment, forced to look at the wreckage, the bruises blooming across my skin, the way my mouth twisted from the effort of pretending I was not afraid. But then I started to draw. With brushes and whatever paints I could find, I painted my face, my bandaged torso, the places where the world had entered me and refused to leave. I painted because it was the only thing that did not hurt. I painted because it was the only thing always mine. They say there were two great accidents in my life, the bus and Diego. Diego was by far the worst, but that came later. For now, I was alone with my reflection, learning to make something out of the pieces. My pain became my material. I did not paint dreams. I painted my own reality, the kind you cannot escape, the kind that sits beside you in the dark and whispers, "You're still here." Every day in that bed was a negotiation between hope and surrender, between the girl I was and the woman I would have to become. I told myself I would walk again. I told myself I would love again. I told myself I would never let anyone see how scared I really was. But the mirror knew better. The mirror saw everything, and when I finally picked up the brush, I realized I could show the world exactly how it felt to be broken and still alive. I did not know it yet, but I was building a new body, one made of paint and stubbornness and the refusal to disappear. He saw my paintings before he saw me. Not the quick sketches from school, but the canvases I painted flat on my back, a mirror above me, the smell of liniment and turpentine thick in the air. I was 21, stitched together by pain and stubbornness, still learning how to walk again. I carried my paintings to Diego's studio, hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped them. I had practiced what to say, but when he turned, every word vanished. He studied my work, really studied it, eyes sharp and searching. Then he smiled, not the public smile, but something private. He told me there was true fire in my work. He wrote it down too, writing the words, "You have a flame in your brush, Frida. It burns." I folded that note into my coat pocket and carried it everywhere, as if it could shield me from the cold. People say love starts with longing, but for me, it started with being seen. Diego named something in me no one else had bothered to notice. He said my pain was honest, that I painted not dreams, but my own reality. I wanted to believe him. I needed someone to believe I could be more than a broken girl with a twisted spine. Diego promised my suffering could become something beautiful, that I could turn wounds into color. I let myself believe him. I let myself be grateful, maybe too grateful. We wrote letters. His were full of praise, wild ideas about art and revolution. Mine tried to sound brave. Sometimes I would touch the dried ink and imagine his paint-stained hands holding mine. I told myself it was fine to want saving. It was not, but I let it happen anyway. All I knew was the thrill of being seen for what I could make, not just what I had lost. I would pay any price for that, and I did. I was 22 when I married Diego. He was 42, twice my age and twice as sure that the world belonged to him. My mother called us the elephant and the dove. She said I would be crushed. I laughed, pretended I didn't care, but her words grew teeth. On the day of the wedding, I wore borrowed shoes and a dress that smelled of starch and worry. My hands shook as I signed the civil registry, as if some part of me already knew I was making a bargain I couldn't keep. There was a promise between us, though nobody read it aloud. Diego said we will not have children. He said it like a fact, the way he talked about paint or politics, or the hunger that drove him from one woman to the next. I nodded, even though my bones ached with the thought of it. I told myself I was choosing art, that I could be enough for him, enough for myself, if I just painted hard enough, loved hard enough. But the truth is, he made the rule, and I agreed, because I wanted him more than I wanted anything else. People think love is grand gestures, but sometimes it is a line in a letter, a quiet agreement no one else witnesses. There was no contract, no paper tucked between the wedding certificate and the family Bible. Only a sentence written in my diary. Diego says there will be no children. I tried to believe it was mutual, that I was too wild and broken to be a mother anyway. But at night, when the house was quiet, I pressed my hand to my belly and wondered what it would have been like to carry something that belonged only to me. I let him have his way. I let him have all of me. I thought I could paint over the emptiness, outlove the ache. I thought if I stayed close enough, he would finally see me as more than a shadow trailing behind his genius. Instead, I learned what it costs to make yourself small for someone else's comfort. I learned that some promises are cages, no matter how softly they are spoken. I told myself I could live with it. I told myself it was fine. It wasn't fine. Not ever. The first house we shared was a lesson in boundaries. You would think marriage would mean living under one roof, breathing the same air, but Diego wanted walls. Not metaphorical ones, actual concrete poured thick and gray, dividing our studios like two stubborn kingdoms. We hired O'Gorman, that boy genius, to draw it up. 2 boxes side by side, each with its own front door, its own shadows, its own silence. Just enough space for his murals to sprawl and for my little easel to sulk by the window. In the middle, a footbridge, a slab of concrete barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without touching. Guillermo, my father, took photographs of it in 1931. In the pictures, the bridge looks like a dare. Cross if you want, but you might not be welcome on the other side. People think it is romantic, the idea of a bridge between lovers. I know better. That bridge was a truce, not a promise. It let us orbit each other, close enough to hear the scrape of Diego's brush at dawn, far enough that I could pretend his world was not always leaking into mine. Sometimes I would stand in the courtyard and look up at that little concrete span, wondering if it was meant for me or just for show. I would cross it when I missed him, or when I wanted to remind him I existed. Other times, I would stay put, counting the cracks in the stone, refusing to budge. My studio smelled of oil paint and cheap cigarettes. His always reeked of turpentine and ego. We told ourselves this was modern, separate spaces, equal artists, no one disappearing into the other. But the truth is, the bridge made it easier to hide. Easier for him to vanish into his work. Easier for me to nurse my loneliness without an audience. I learned to measure love in footsteps, the sound of Diego crossing over, or not. The bridge was supposed to connect us. Most days, it just reminded me how far apart we already were. Detroit, 1931. Steel towers and factory smoke replaced the gardens of Coyoacán. The city pressed in, cold and gray, nothing like the warmth of home. Diego called it progress. I called it exile. He became a celebrity here, the great Mexican muralist, swept from factory tours to banquets, always surrounded, always needed. I was the painter's wife, trailing behind, fading into the background. Sometimes I felt I vanished the moment we crossed the border, lost in a country that never cared to know my name. Americans adored Diego, or at least what he could create for them. I watched him grow larger, his laughter echoing through marble halls, his hands stained with colors that no longer belonged to me. I stood at the edge of his fame, invisible, clutching letters from home. My mother wrote about jacarandas blooming, my sister's children, the neighbor's dog barking at the postman. I read her words until the paper softened, until I could almost smell Mexican earth in the creases. I tried to paint, but the Detroit light was wrong, thin, cold, never quite enough. My brushes felt heavy. My body ached in ways I thought I had left behind. The doctors here were polite, distant, talking about my spine as if it were a diagram to be fixed. I missed pain that felt familiar, the kind I knew how to carry. Here, it was just another thing that marked me as different. Sometimes I watched Diego from the window, surrounded by admirers, his laughter filling the Institute's grand rooms. I wondered if he noticed how small I had become, or if I was just another suitcase he had brought along. At night, I pressed my face to the glass, trying to remember the scent of rain on Casa Azul's blue walls. I wrote letters I never sent, pages thick with longing and resentment, for the way he thrived here, for the way I shrank. I told myself I was here for art, for love, for something bigger. But most days, I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's dream. I missed Mexico so much it hollowed me out. I missed my language, the taste of chilies, the sun on my skin. I missed being seen. He called it freedom, called it art, called it love. But the rules were always his. In Detroit, he moved from woman to woman, each affair shrugged off as if it were nothing. I tried to convince myself I could be modern, that jealousy was for the weak, that artists lived above the old laws. But every night, I counted his absences, pressing my hand to my belly, trying to quiet the ache that never left me. I wanted a child, something that belonged to me, not borrowed, not bargained for. But my body was a battlefield, scarred and unreliable. In 1932, I lost my first pregnancy at Henry Ford Hospital. The doctors spoke in cold, foreign words, while I watched a tiny shape slip away, smaller than a fist, more fragile than a secret. I painted the bed red, the cord, the instruments, the blood that wouldn't stop. I called it Henry Ford Hospital. because I had nothing else. In my diary, I wrote, "I am not sick. I am broken. But I am happy as long as I can paint." He never bled. He never waited for a doctor to look away before letting grief spill out. He just moved on, found another woman, another distraction, another way not to look at me. I watched him from hospital windows, his laughter echoing down the halls, untouched by the emptiness that hollowed me out. He said, "We agreed, no children." But I never agreed to this kind of emptiness. I never agreed to be the only one who mourned. In 1934, another loss, another hospital, another white room, another body that failed to become a child. I painted my birth, a mess of blood and pain, a mother's face hidden, a daughter arriving already half gone. I painted because I didn't know how else to survive. The doctors called it bad luck. He called it fate. I called it punishment. By 1938, a third loss. My body had become a graveyard for all the things I was never allowed to keep. Each time, his affairs piled up like dirty rags in the studio. I painted because it was the only thing always mine, the only proof I was still here, even as everything else slipped away. June 1935. I found Christina's letter in Diego's coat pocket, her handwriting familiar and careless, spelling out the truth I never wanted to read. She wrote about afternoons in the empty house, about secrets and longing, about Diego making her feel seen. I read it twice, not believing. Then I stopped breathing. My hands shook so hard I nearly ripped the page. The room was silent, as if the world was waiting for me to shatter. I did not scream. I went to the bathroom, picked up scissors, and cut my hair until the woman in the mirror was a stranger. Black strands covered the tile. I wanted to erase the part of me that could still feel, to become someone Diego and Christina would not recognize. There is a photograph from that day, hair cropped, eyes swollen, a man's suit hanging off my shoulders. People call it defiance. They miss the emptiness behind the eyes, the way my mouth is pressed shut to hold back the sobs. Losing a child taught me pain, but betrayal is a different wound. It does not bruise, it splits you. Christina was my other half, the one who braided my hair, who whispered stories in the dark, who knew every secret. She said she was sorry, but her eyes slid away from mine. Diego said nothing, just watched, measuring the distance between us. In my diary, I wrote that there have been two great accidents in my life. One was the tram, the other was Diego. Diego was by far the worst. But that day, I understood there was a third, the day I lost my sister. I painted myself alone, hair shorn, blood running down my back. I painted to prove I was still here, even if I did not know who I was anymore. My pain became my material, sharper than any brush. I did not paint dreams. I painted reality, the kind that leaves scars you cannot hide. After that, the house was silent. Christina left for a while. I slept in a room that smelled of medicine and tears. Diego kept painting, kept collecting lovers. The family was a cracked plate, glued for show. I told myself I could survive if I kept painting, if I kept breathing. But the truth is, I wanted to be loved by both of them. I wanted to believe blood was thicker than desire. I wanted to believe I could forgive. But I stayed. Leon Trotsky arrived at Casa Azul with the weight of exile pressed into his coat and a bodyguard at every shadow. Diego welcomed him like a hero, but I watched him with a different hunger. Trotsky's Russian was thick as honey, but his eyes were sharp, always searching for the next betrayal. In that house, The air was heavy with secrets. I found myself drawn to him, not to his politics, not to his revolution, but to the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. He was a man who had lost everything except his stubborn heart. I understood that kind of loss. We spoke in broken Spanish, half whispers over coffee, both of us pretending the world outside was not closing in. For a few weeks, I let myself believe I could be someone else, a woman who did not belong to Diego, a woman who could choose her own disasters. Trotsky called me his star, wrote me little notes in shaky English, and slipped them into my books. I kept them hidden in a drawer, proof that I could still make someone tremble. There is a photograph from that autumn, me in a flowered dress, Trotsky beside me, both of us smiling like children caught stealing. People see politics in that picture. I see the only time I let myself taste freedom, even if it was borrowed, even if it was doomed. I wanted to feel wanted for my own mind, my own hands. With Trotsky, I was not Diego's shadow or Mexico's wounded saint. I was just Frida, reckless and alive. It did not last. Nothing good ever does. But for a little while, I remembered what it felt like to be the one who leaves first. And that memory was enough to carry me through the next breaking. The divorce papers were signed in November 1939, but the real separation happened long before ink touched paper. Diego said we were incompatible. I said nothing, because what do you say when the person who named your fire decides he is tired of the burn? I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I had been skinned. There is a photograph from that winter. Me in a starched white dress, heart pounding under the fabric, pretending I was whole. I was not. I was two women stitched together by longing and spite. That is what I painted, the split that would not heal. Two Fridas, one in a European dress, prim and bloodless, the girl he once claimed to love, the other in Tijuana lace, heart exposed, holding the vein that connected me to him even after he cut me loose. I finished it late in 1939, the paint barely dry when I realized I had painted my own autopsy. People stare at the canvas and call it surreal. I call it a confession. I painted what was real, the public wife and the secret, wounded self, side by side on a stormy bench, hands clasped only because nobody else would hold them. In my diary, I wrote that I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. My reality was blood on linen, scissors in hand, a heart that would not stop leaking. I was tired of pretending I could be whole. If Diego was going to leave, I wanted the world to see exactly what he left behind. Two Fridas, one abandoned, one still begging for love. Both of them, me. I thought naming the pain would end it. Instead, it became a second skin. I painted to survive, because art was the only thing always mine. But even that could not keep me from crossing back into his shadow. On December 24th, 1940, we signed the marriage contract again. The air was sharp with ink and cold tile. Diego's signature sprawled across the page, careless as ever. I pressed my own name down hard, every letter deliberate. There was no talk of forgiveness, no flowers or promises. Instead, I brought terms. Separate houses, separate studios, separate beds. I would not be his shadow. I would keep my name, my money, my work. My solitude was non-negotiable. He agreed, or pretended to. Maybe it was about pride, or just the spectacle of our reunion, two artists side by side, as if that could erase the past. I read the contract twice before signing. In the margin, Diego had written, "Each will respect the other's artistic independence." It sounded gentle, but it was a boundary. No more saving each other from ourselves. Love, but with rules. Marriage, but with exits. I thought if I drew a line between us, I could keep what was left of me. I needed to believe it. That winter, I convinced myself that legal clauses could hold us together. The ink was barely dry before my body began to falter again. For now, I clung to the rules, hoping they'd be enough. 35 surgeries, each one another mark on the body's ledger. Hospitals became routine, the scent of ether, the clatter of gurney wheels, the chill of metal braces. Corsets of steel, leather, plaster pressed against my skin, holding me together, but never holding back the pain. I painted them, painted the wheelchair, the crutches, the body that refused to heal. In July 1953, gangrene forced the doctors to amputate my right leg. I mourned it, then painted myself with wings. If I couldn't walk, I would fly. In June 1954, I insisted on attending my own exhibition, arriving on a stretcher. The doctor said no, but I needed to see my paintings in the light. I wore flowers in my hair, drank tequila, laughed until it hurt. Some called it bravery. I called it stubbornness. My last canvas was a burst of red watermelons, Viva la vida, life in defiance, even as death waited. On July 13th, 1954, my body finally gave out. The death certificate read pulmonary embolism. My ashes were sealed in a frog-shaped urn, a private joke with Diego. I was never a martyr or a saint. I painted my own reality and refused to vanish quietly. People want to know why I stayed, why I let the wound reopen again and again until pain was all I had to work with. I don't have a clever answer. Just this: sometimes the heart chooses ruin and calls it devotion. Today, they hang my paintings in quiet, reverent rooms. But the truth bleeds through every canvas. Survival is never tidy. Love is never safe. Tell me, what would you have done? Thank you for listening to my story.